Welcome to another episode of the Unpolished Gems podcast. My dad and I are super excited to welcome Paul Rodriguez Jr., also known as P-Rod, to skateboarding fans worldwide onto the show today. Paul was actually in the car on the way to go skateboarding while we recorded this episode. So we had a little bit of a tech issue at the 45-minute mark of this episode. So we actually decided to cut it into two different parts. I hope you guys enjoy this conversation with Paul Rodriguez Jr. as much as my dad and I did. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. This is one that I've definitely been waiting a while to reshare with you guys. And I think it's been over 5 years, Paul, since we did the first one or close to that. So I'm super excited to welcome onto the show Paul Rodriguez, which is insane. For a little bit of context, and then we'll break into it. Paul, obviously, for those of you guys that don't know, is one of the greatest skateboarders of all time, founded Primitive Skateboarding, has had a career outside of that, and everything from beer to acting, business, sort of everything in between. I think he's lived 85 different lives and careers on that kind of stuff. So thank you for coming on. I'm super excited to have you back for another one.
Always glad to be back. You know, we got to do our every half a decade check-in, right?
I think it's important. Make sure we're still alive and doing well. The greatest story that I want to start with, and then we'll work backwards, was the single best happy birthday post of my entire life. Correlates to a moment when Paul was one of my first clients. I don't know what was wrong with him that he trusted 17-year-old me to get to work with him. But could you run through a little bit behind? I go on my first official business meeting. I convinced my dad that at 17, I'm great to go stay with this guy, Paul. And what happens when I show up at your house?
Well, you come in, you're a respectful kid, well-mannered, and you're hanging out. I think it's the first night you get in. So maybe we'll give you a little credit to maybe having a little bit of, you're coming from the East Coast, so you're used to being 3 hours ahead. Maybe we'll give you a little credit for that. But I don't know. It wasn't very late in the evening, and we were just hanging out watching TV. Next thing I notice, I look over, and you're just sprawled out, dead asleep, maybe like 7 p.m. If I remember correctly, I feel like you got the Al Bundy, like one hand in your pants situation going on. And I was like, oh, yeah. This deserves this.
Oh, I definitely do.
This deserves a picture right here. So I had to save that moment.
Probably top 5 picture of me, both most embarrassing and greatest picture of my entire life. So I think that weekend was just fully degenerate. My dad was like, "Oh, how was your business trip?" I'm like, "Well, I fell asleep on Paul's couch. He let me drive some person's Rolls Royce who I don't know whose it was. I don't think it was Paul's.
Oh,
but he let me drive it. It was a great.
I forgot about that. My friend Aaron, let me borrow his Dawn, his Rolls Royce Dawn. And
also, Dad, Paul is responsible for. At the time, I was useless on smoking cigars.
Oh, yeah.
Paul, and now I've become somewhat of a degenerate of that.
So thank you, Paul, for introducing him to cigars.
Yes, no problem, man. My pleasure. I saw his trajectory, man. He's got big goals, big visions, and when you have those type of dreams, man, at some point you're gonna end up smoking cigars. So I figure I might as well get him started.
The only reason Paul brought me to this cigar lounge in the city, and I remember vividly, I'm in slides, a t-shirt, and like shorts. The only reason they let us in was because the guy was a fan of Paul and Primitive. Otherwise, they would have kicked me to the curb in 10 seconds.
That was when we were in New York, huh?
Yeah, we were in New York, and we went out to dinner, and you were like, "You want to smoke a cigar?" I'm like, "Ooh, cigars. Yeah, let's do it." We walk up. The guy's like, "Holy shit, are you Paul Rodriguez?" And you're like, "Yeah, but he's with me, so you got to let him in with his slides." And I was like, you know what? The credit of being a great dude and being Paul, and obviously you're awesome with all of those fans.
I'm grateful that they let us in. Yeah, that was nice. Every time I'm in New York, I like to find a nice cigar lounge somewhere in like Manhattan area and just try to get the vibes of the city.
Well, Dad, I know we talked about a little bit going into this podcast, and it might be interesting for you to come in here on versions of success, and sort of Paul obviously had such an early start into being in the public eye.
Yeah.
What I wanted to hit on was like, there's such a small percentage of people that hit the public eye and have to deal with that at a young age. What was that experience like at 14, 15, 16, having to take on a whole new responsibility of not only being Paul, the trying to be a student, but Paul, you need to be in public face and skateboard and sign autographs and do that whole thing?
Well, let's be honest. Paul at 14, 15, 16, I wouldn't put too much of the trying to be a student part as a part of that equation. Once I found skateboarding, like I'll call it youthful naivete, but I just, in my heart of hearts, I just knew it was my calling, and it was just like, it was my dream, and everything else fell to the wayside. So I was just hell bent on making this happen. But as far as getting into the limelight of skateboarding and stuff, I actually felt like it came somewhat natural, only because, my father, being a stand-up comic, actor, all the time growing up with him, I was around him, seeing how he handled himself, saw how he handled himself, on public stages, how he handled himself in person with fans, how he conducted himself in interviews. So I kind of had all that kind of subconsciously planted in my mind at a young age, not knowing early on that I was ever going to need those skills or qualities. So by the time, I started getting a little limelight and getting more into the public eye, I kind of felt like I had like a little bit of schooling on it almost.
So what impact did your dad have on just the shape your career ended up taking? And what was his level of involvement as you were making the progression from somebody just starting out to being a world-class athlete?
Well, I think a lot of my dad's impact on it was really big, first of all, but it was more hands-off, though. It was more by me learning by watching, by seeing and like absorbing, watching him do what he does. Of course, as I started, getting a little bit of notoriety, he would give me some, tips and, just tell me, look, son, stay focused. Certain distractions might come in your life, but, you gotta keep your eye on the prize and those type of things. So I really credit him for just being that example that I could watch in real time in front of me, because actually he didn't really know too much about what was going on in my skate career until I was probably like 18, because I grew up living with my mom and I would see my dad, but I didn't really tell him anything. And early on, he didn't understand the vision of it. You know what I mean? Like, I was just like, yeah, Dad, I'm just skateboarding with my friends, having a good time. He didn't understand what was happening. Like, yeah, I got some sponsors, but it didn't sink into him what that actually meant. And then one day must have been 18, he calls me and he says, hey, what's this about you're in a video game? I said, oh, yeah, Dad, I'm in the Tony Hawk video game. What? How come you didn't tell me? It's like, oh, I don't know. I forgot. I guess because his assistant saw me in an advertisement for it or something and told him, like, yeah, your son's in a video game with Tony Hawk. And that's, I think, when he finally realized, like, oh, this is something. Like, it's not just you just going out with your friends and screwing around. No, one other thing that really, I think was really impactful for me is, his career was going from slightly before I was born all the way through, till now, really. So growing up, I always saw somebody who had a career doing what they love and following their passion. And I really think that planted a seed in my mind and taught me early on that to follow your dreams and go for your goals, because I saw it right in front of me. So I thought it was normal that you just pursue your dreams and your passions and you go for it. I didn't think that was like, something that was like a rare thing, I just thought like, hey, if everybody has dreams, like, you got to go for them. And I think that's really important, because always growing up, whether I was skating or before I was skating, wanting to play guitar or playing baseball, every time I had a new hobby in my mind, that's what I was going to do. That was my goal. That was my dream. That's what I was going to make my calling,
How did you narrow that down, Paul, from, all the different things that a young man is doing to, I'm going all in on skateboarding? And did you have a vision of being a world champion? Like, when you realized that you could pursue whatever your dream is from watching your dad, how did that convert to, this is what I'm choosing, and I'm going down the path until I get there?
Yeah, it was actually really easy. It was, from when I was very small, I was always a very active kid. Had to be jumping around, moving, playing some kind of sport or doing some kind of martial arts or something. So really, it just whatever caught my attention. So my youngest memory was playing t-ball in Little League, when I was probably about 5 or 6. And then from there, I got an interest in, I saw a Bruce Lee movie, and I thought he was the coolest guy ever. And at that time, also, Jean-Claude Van Damme was the biggest action star. And so, I saw these guys, and they were, so cool to me. And I watched all their movies over and over again. I told my mom, Mom, I want to take martial arts class. And, okay, sure. She put me in a martial arts class, and I did that obsessively for, a few years. And then all of a sudden, one time, I saw... I want to say it was a Nirvana documentary, and all of a sudden I just saw, the guitars and the band and the music, and I became so fascinated by the instruments, thought they were so cool. I wanted to learn how to play guitar, and then it was, I watched the movie The Crow with Brandon Lee, Bruce Lee's son, and in there his character was a rock star who passed away. And so the fact that I loved martial arts and Bruce Lee and then Brandon Lee, and I'm watching this movie that I'm thinking is an action movie. In the movie, he's playing guitar and he has a band, and I thought it looked so cool. I wanted to be just like him in The Crow. So I asked my mom if I could get a guitar for that Christmas, and then all of a sudden I became obsessed with playing guitar. And I found Jimi Hendrix, and Nirvana became my favorite band, and I just wanted to be in the biggest band ever and be the greatest guitar player ever. And then I did that for a few years. And I went to a new school, and I see some kids skateboarding out front every morning when I would walk to school. And I thought that was amazing. How do they flip the board? How do they land on it? How do they, ride away after they make it, do a flip? And I ended up becoming friends with those kids, asking if I could try out their skateboard. And for Christmas again, Mom, I just want to get a skateboard for Christmas. And that came along, and for whatever reason, once I started skateboarding, no other hobby, no other sport or anything just took my attention away. So it wasn't even necessarily by my choice. I fell in love with it, just as I did with guitar playing and baseball and martial arts. But for whatever reason, no other thing was able to take my attention away from it. So it wasn't a conscious, I'm all in on this. Everything I did, I was all in until something else came along. And skateboarding just never had that.
What I wanted to push on was, I've been lucky to see over the last, since I've known you, I guess it's been 6 years or 5 years, the evolution from you're an elite athlete and skateboarder and other things. And I think one of the things I talk about a bunch with people is, what does that next chapter or an additive thing look like? Could you just walk through what that has been like? Because your identity for so long was correlated with Paul Rodriguez, the guy with more than 10 Nike signature shoes, as a world-class skateboarder and in video games. And obviously you have other passions. You've had a successful exit in beer and in water and all of this stuff. Could you just talk about what that journey has been like?
Ever since I was young, also because I saw my dad, I saw he did well for himself. I always, I guess to put it bluntly, wanted to be rich, as well. And I always had a vision of living in a big, beautiful house and having all the fancy, nice, opulent stuff. And, in skateboarding, it's not really a sport that you do and you get rich from. It's very hard to make a lot of money in the skateboard industry. And I was fortunate enough, for whatever reason, thank God, to be marketable and get big sponsors that were rare to get in skateboarding, like a Nike and a Target and AT&T and all these type of things over the years. So I was able to make some good money, but thank God early on I had the foresight to know that there is a window in skateboarding. It could be a very small window, and in the scope of life and traditional careers, it's going to be a short one. Even though right now I'm in my going on my 21st year of being a professional. Like, I didn't expect that I would be able to have a career this long in skateboarding. But even so, at some point, still, I'm going to have to retire, and in the scope of life, I'd still be very young. So I knew that once the income from sponsors and my prime earning years are up, I'm not going to want to change my lifestyle. I'm not going to want to get a job. And, I was fortunate enough where I started skating early on and got into it early enough where I never had a job in my life. So I literally wouldn't know what to do. I wouldn't know how to handle it mentally. I would probably become very depressed, and it would probably throw me for a loop. So early on, I just I started asking questions. I asked my dad about his accountants, his people, and then I learned about financial planners, money managers, and slowly but surely over the years, I learned about real estate and how money actually works. You know what I mean? Like how to set yourself up to make passive income and investments that grow over time and compounding interest and these type of things just became interesting to me, because I knew at some point, especially in a career like skateboarding, any day you could get hurt. Any day could be a career-ending injury. Anytime a contract's up, that could be your last contract, from a sponsor. So I didn't want to just be at the mercy of anyone else, and I wanted to hopefully be able to retire on my own terms, and be able to continue, quite frankly, the lifestyle I've gotten accustomed to living, with or without having sponsorships.
And Paul, have you been able to achieve that?
Close. I mean, I'm still putting that all together. I mean, I definitely have got investments that I've been building and growing for a long time now, 15, 20, probably close to 20 years now. And new investments that I'm hoping will pan out, as well. So, the plan is going well, but I would say if I had to stop right now today, no more active income coming in, I would probably have to adjust my lifestyle a little bit, cut down some overhead. But I would say I would be able to be fine, but I would have to minimize my lifestyle a little bit. So, God willing, I still am able to do this for quite some time. I still have some nice, strong contracts in place with a lot of years left. So my plan is by the time any of those run up, I will have successfully built that plan to fully take over my life and not have to change it up yet.
Because for the record, that thing's got to stay active, because when I come to California, like I did the last time I was there, having Normatec as a recovery to just sit in a chair and like hang and look at X metal things after, or X game medals after going in a pool was pretty great. So I hope that continues going. Cause
No, God willing, we all don't know the future, but I think I'm playing my cards right. I feel pretty good about it.
What's been that, one of the things I know we spoke about a lot back when I did more day-to-day work with you on stuff was the skateboarding industry is a very unique industry in the way that they view people doing alternative things, with taking certain brand deals. And I'm responsible for a fair share of mistakes that we made together during those couple years, in addition to fun stuff that we did on that stuff. But can you talk a little bit about how the industry views that stuff on, like, if you take a deal with this brand or you go start this business, that you're not being a core, true, only skateboarder and you're selling out?
Yeah. I don't know what it is. I mean, skateboarding was built off of like just a rebellious kind of culture and mindset. And it's still in there today. And I don't necessarily think I'm not totally anti that either, because I definitely still have some boundaries that I really wouldn't cross, you know what I mean, as far as the sellout thing goes. But it's just one of those subcultures that was a really tight-knit community, and the early skaters just didn't want it getting polluted and commercialized and kind of the innocence taken out of it, which I totally respect and see the value in that. But I don't fully. That's just not for me. It's just to do something. Look. I skateboard for whether I was getting paid for it or not is something I've done. And after I retire, as long as my legs still work, I will skateboard without receiving a paycheck, just because it's been so much a part of my life. But since I've had certain opportunities and got certain kind of limelight in this industry that not every skater gets, I would have been, in my opinion, a fool to not capitalize on a Nike contract. Imagine if I had said no to Nike when I was 19. Like, no, man, that's selling out. That's whack.
Did you get pushback on that?
I wouldn't call it pushback. I got some criticism for sure, but it didn't mean anything to me. I didn't carry any weight of that criticism. I try to think of what my life would have been like if I said no and I'd have stayed on the sponsor I was with. Would I still have a career? Would I have even, where would I be right now? It would have been horrible. So I couldn't imagine that it'd be anywhere close to what my career has become, not having ever signed with Nike or AT&T or a Target and things of that caliber, So I've been able to take care of my daughter, take care of my family, set myself up for the future. Like, to me, the term sellout is going against your morals, going against something, like doing something that you lose sleep over, stealing and cheating and lying, this type of stuff. I didn't take from nobody. I capitalized off opportunities that came to me, off the talent that I worked hard to build and create through God. And I said yes to him. I didn't get anybody else's way. I didn't chop nobody down to get here.
Do you think, Paul, that people confuse that definition quite a bit and associate selling out with simply becoming successful and leveraging opportunities?
100%, especially when you're a kid, especially when you're a teenager and you look up to the older guys who are, say, like in a skate shop and telling you this is cool, this is not cool, blah, blah, blah. And you're looking to these guys for guidance. And I looked up to those very same type of guys, you know what I mean? But at some point, you need to also have your own mind and be independent and think for yourself. You take what you've learned from the culture, you take what you've learned from various people, utilize that information, put it through the filter of your own brain, and make your own educated decision off of that. Me having had the experience of seeing my father achieve great success and achieve mainstream success, but then also me getting involved in a sport that is an underground core kind of tight-knit sport, I kind of hybrided those two personalities together. So I always had big dreams and big visions before I became a skater. And once I became a skater, it was the same thing. I want to be the biggest, the best, and go as far as I can with this. To me, that's all part of the progress. Just like learning new tricks and developing new skills on your skateboard, also progressing your endorsements, progressing your accolades, progressing your finances is all part of the progress. I want to progress in every way, not just in a one-way line,
Like, what would be your biggest insight? I mean, the reason this is near and dear and personal to me is because, Paul, I'm 54. I've been doing the same thing, business, since I'm in my 20s, right? So I've hit that 30-year mark, raised a family, did a whole bunch of other stuff. But the thing that I think happens, and I've witnessed, is when anybody does anything for 20 to 30 years, there's an opportunity for either re-upping in a new way because everything has changed,
right?
Or creating a new chapter, and finding, like, getting rid of a previous identity and stepping into a new identity, and allowing that to happen, and not like basically lamenting about the best days that happened behind you, instead of the new ones you're gonna. So how have you navigated that? Because it sounds like you've had a lot of chapters in a relatively short life so far.
Yeah.
And how do you keep reinventing yourself and not succumbing to fear and panic and anxiety over the future, knowing that you could have your career taken away at any moment?
Yeah. That's a good question. I guess first and foremost, I believe in God. I believe in a higher power. So I spend a lot of time in prayer, a lot of time just trusting God and trying to exercise faith in real time. So that's been major for me. And then I guess also being naive, especially younger when you're a kid. When I was, first started skating 12, 13, 14, as far as you're invincible. Your body bounces back. Every morning you skate. Every day you skate 8, 9 hours. Every morning you wake up and you feel brand new again. You could do it all over again. It didn't even come across my mind that there was serious injuries or anything of that nature. I felt brand new every morning waking up. So that kind of helped me for a long period of time. It actually was something that as I became early to mid 20s, I started realizing like, okay, this can end at any time. I'm starting to feel soreness. I'm starting to feel pain, aches, and things of that nature. I have a child now. I have to be responsible for more than just myself. So there was moments there where I had to mentally adjust and realize like I'm not just a kid anymore. I have real adult responsibilities, and there was some adjustment periods, some anxiety times for sure. But thank God I learned how to maybe filter some of that fear and some of that anxiety into turning it into more focus, more determined focus, giving me more of a purpose. I made it more of a purpose to excel at what I did. I already thought I was driven and wanted to be as best as possible, one of the greats in skateboarding when I was just supporting myself. But once I had a daughter, I had a family to take care of, I had an even stronger, higher purpose. So I learned to take that and make me rise rather than shy away from it.
Going into a little bit on just like a specific instance, and I think it ties in here. I was working with you when you had your knee injury.
Yeah.
And I remember talking about it with you and going through it.
Yeah.
How does that correlate with what you were just talking to on your body doesn't bounce back as quick? And I know you hadn't really had any major injuries. And not only did you tear your ACL, but you tore all three.
Yeah.
What was that like mentally, physically, and just getting back up and not calling it a day and being like, I'm going to rehab and recover from this and get back out there?
Yeah, that was tough, man. Especially that early beginning, first few weeks of like actually like allowing it to sink in and just accepting the fact that like, all right, dude, this is your life right now. This is gonna be your life for at least a year. Once the doctors and everybody told me like the recovery time and what it would take, this is your life for at least 1 year. Once I finally allowed that to like sink in and like accept that, then I just looked at it as, okay, well, you've always told yourself, you've always said you want to be one of the greats, right? You always wanted to be one of these legends in skateboarding or just a legend like anybody else you look up to in any other field. And I read a lot of autobiographies on some of my heroes, and none of these guys who we call greats in whatever field that they're in have ever just had a smooth sail all the way through the finish line. They all have moments where they hit this crossroad, where they're doubting, where they're not sure, where where things get dark. So I just try to tell myself, Paul, this is just your time, your version, your chapter of your book. This is that chapter for you right now. So if you really want to be who you say you want to be, this is a perfect opportunity to become that. And I always just try to frame things up and play a game with myself and try to reposition my perspective to figure out how can I turn this into a win or an opportunity or to a blessing. And don't get me wrong, it was hard. The whole process, there was days where I was like, man, fuck all that, dude. That's nonsense, man. This is whack. I better start thinking of something else. And then there were certain days where like, nah, I got this, man. I'm making progress. I feel good. And there was a lot of back and forth, up and down, roller coasters. Some days where I felt hopeless, like, no, I'm never going to bounce back. It's way too messed up. Or some days where I was like, nah, I'm so excited to bounce back. This is going to be great. I'm going to overcome it, and it's going to be a great it was tough, man. And I'm grateful that I'm through it. and I wouldn't ever want to go through it again, God willing. Now that I'm on the other side of it and back to doing what I love, I look at it as a blessing and as a time that I grew a lot and learned a lot of appreciation and gratitude for a lot of things I was taking for granted.
What would be the top, like, 1 or 2 lessons that came out of that experience and challenge?
The main lesson is you never fail until you quit, right? Just because you didn't succeed today or tomorrow or this month or next month doesn't mean you're failing. You know, you only fail when you just put it down and give up and walk away and never go back to it again. No matter who you are, no matter who the greatest people we think in the world is, they doubt themselves on certain days. They stress out. They have personal issues, personal problems. This is just life. This is just life. It happens to all of us. And so the lesson is you never fail until you quit. And you just have to find ways, play games with yourself, tell yourself stories to keep you motivated on those days where you just don't feel like it. You know, some days you just don't feel like it. Like going to PT, going to rehab, and all the training that I had to do in between. And then on the downtime, when I wasn't at the gym, when I wasn't in physical therapy, what to do with myself, that was a big struggle because I was used to always moving and being active. So having downtime and learning how to use that constructively was tough.
And then how did you fill the downtime? Like, Paul, what did you discover when you had a lot of, like, open space?
Yeah, so I was very lucky to also, thanks again to seeing my dad growing up, being on movie sets and TV show sets and stuff like that. I always wanted to become an actor at some point in my life. I always had a interest in acting. And actually, before I hurt my knee, I was doing some acting classes, just because I was like, well, who knows, man? Maybe after the skateboarding thing, I could become an actor. So I might as well start taking classes now and be preparing. So once I'm fully done with skateboarding, I can hit the ground running. So luckily, when my knee was hurt, I just started going to acting class more often, going more days a week, practicing techniques of acting, reading more scripts and trying to learn how to break them down and break down the characters and doing all that stuff helped me quite a bit. But there was definitely times where I wasn't being as constructive, maybe a little bit too much alcohol at sometimes, maybe a little bit too much junk food at sometimes. It was definitely not just like, okay, boom, that's all I'm doing. It was a windy road, man. It was a windy road, but I'm thankful that now, looking back, I'm thankful for every bit of that experience.
When jumping into new industries, and I know Mikey Taylor ended up doing a similar thing with real estate, and we got to get him back on here, because I was mapping back on how I met you. And I don't know if you remember the map back, but the map, I went as far back as I could, and it was an Instagram Live with Mikey Taylor. And Paul hops in, and he put something in. I should have known who Paul was, but I didn't know who Paul was. But I see a check mark, and I'm 16. I'm like, oh, shit, he probably is cool. I'm like, I'd love to interview him for my podcast. Mikey's like, you should talk to Paul. And that was the start of the whole relationship. And it's just crazy how the world works. Like, I mapped back that initial thing to so much that's happened in my life since then, indirectly and directly. And it's funny how that works. But with Mikey, he also went into real estate, and now he's in politics. I have to have him on this to talk about that. But what's it been like seeing your peers outside of you change chapters? Like, you grew up with him in skateboarding.
Yeah. Mikey is like a shining star example of how to transition from one career to the next with such grace and skill. I am so happy to see him. Like, he is just as in love with real estate as he was when we were 14, 15 years old skating every day. Like, he found his next skateboarding. So I'm so happy for him on that. And, for him, it was a different situation. His skateboard career got took from him. He wasn't able to decide when to retire. You know, unfortunately, well, now it's probably fortunate because look what he's become. But at the time, you know, unfortunately, like he had a contract cut and no re-ups, no re-signs, you know, and he, you know, he's told me before that was some of the hardest times of his life, the darkest times of his life, and he didn't know what to do with himself, didn't know what was going on. Luckily, he had done well for himself financially, saved up a lot and invested a lot, and didn't have pressure on him to like go out and get the first job just to pay the bills. But he did have the luxury and the blessing to like take some time and find himself, find what he wanted to do.
We hope you guys enjoyed part 1 of our conversation with P-Rod. Make sure to stay tuned to all of our social channels and here for part 2 of our episode with Paul and all of our other interviews coming out over the coming weeks. Thanks, guys.